thanks so much for the invitation and for the introduction. I'm Zach Kilhoffer. I'm an American based in Brussels. For the last almost 4 years, most of what I've done is study what can alternatively be called platform work or gig work or crowd work or cloud work or the collaborative economy or like a million other terms that mostly are not very descriptive and don't make much sense. But the point is, what I'm here to talk about a little bit is I think the way that the marketplaces in the online platform economy work and how this impacts freelancers. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to a couple of my thoughts here, and I'll pass over to Andy. So when I say platform work, what I mean is this, and this is my little model that I use in a lot of research papers here. What I call platform worker could just as easily be called freelancer. And mostly when I speak to people who meet my definition of platform worker, they consider themselves to be self-employed or just freelancers or whatever. But the key thing here is that for me, a platform worker is providing a service in exchange for payment. Clients can be businesses, they could be individuals, doesn't really matter. Then you have the platform, which is online, typically just a company or a website who sets the terms and conditions for this intermediation of payment and services. And you see this little dotted line. It's what I call the black box of intermediation. And one of the things that was sort of innovative about platforms is that a lot of this takes place without human intervention. A lot of this is algorithmically controlled. It's algorithmic management, algorithmic matching. There can be some human influence, but the majority of the time, that's not really what is occurring because it's less efficient. So the long story short is that it's a triangular relationship. There are three main parties. You have whoever is buying the service, you have the freelancer, and you have the platform. And so it's slightly different than your normal, employment relationship that you can see is, standard work or traditional forms of work. So one thing that I see a lot, and I've interviewed, I don't even know how many platform workers or freelancers in different countries I've interviewed. They tend to be overall satisfied with their work, and it can be fantastic. It can be a way to achieve greater economic mobility. It can also have a lot of negatives. So Eurofound is a very influential research organization in Europe. They especially study working conditions. And one thing they found to be very consistent is that when you have more flexibility in your work, then you tend to have more satisfaction in your work, but you also have a worse work-life balance. And so this is something that maybe as a freelancer you can identify with. You can also have issues with financial security because your paycheck is not as secure as a traditional employee would have. And also social protection in many countries is an issue. In certain countries, it doesn't make a difference if you're self-employed or not. Looking at perhaps Iceland and to some extent the Nordic countries in particular, but in a place like Germany or the United States and many others, certainly health insurance, paid sick days, these sorts of things are just not there or really lacking for the freelancers. There's also some kind of shared issues with the way that platform dynamics work themselves out. One of them that is talked about in the economic literature a lot is what they call network effects. And so what this means is that you have a dynamic of winner takes most or winner takes all, right? So network effects are the reason why Google's advertising ecosystem is so dominant and there's so little space for other actors in this market space. And similarly, it's the reason why within a single platform, you see that one or just a handful of workers are able to get most of the contracts, are able to do most of the work and to earn most of the money. It's a network effect. It's sort of this self-reinforcing, strengthening cycle that is present in many spaces of the online economy, but in platform work particularly. Another issue that I see a lot that seems to be in many platforms is this lack of transparency, right? It's what I call the black box of intermediation. And so it means that you might get this idea that you want to join Upwork or Freelancer or Guru or one of these sites, and you're just gonna start finding clients and making money, and that's phenomenal. But when it comes to the nitty gritty, the details about how these transactions work and for example, what happens with your intellectual property rights of whatever you produce. These sorts of things are not always very clear. And whenever there tend to be problems, then there's not a great way to solve them, which is the final point here. There's often a lack of dispute resolution. So let's say that you're a digital artist and you spend weeks producing some brilliant work. And what happens at the point where a client claims to be dissatisfied, claims that you didn't follow their instructions, perhaps refuses to pay, offers you less money for the work, and so on, maybe just, accepts it, drops you a 1-star rating, and says that you're the worst person they've ever worked with. These are disputes that happen quite frequently in online platforms. And in many cases, the platform sort of takes the stance that we have nothing to do with this relationship between the client and the worker. Like, this is just not what we do. We simply allow you to find each other. But if there's a problem, it's on you, right? Which can obviously be very problematic for platform workers. It also creates a situation where, especially if the platform workers rely on their reputation, then it creates an incentive whereby the platform workers have to do absolutely whatever they can to avoid displeasing a client, and it can cause real issues. So a couple of quick findings about big freelance platforms. I worked on a project recently with the International Labor Organization and with the JRC, where we gathered a bunch of data from a bunch of big name platforms. We wanted to understand more about basic questions of how many platform workers there are on a given platform and how much of them are active, how much they earn, these sorts of things, right? There's one very big name platform for online freelance, which I'm sure that all of you have heard of. But I was really shocked when I started doing some analysis, because under 1% of the workers who had taken the time to make their profile and put it online, under 1% have ever earned a single dollar. So there's over 1 million freelancers on this actual platform. It was actually something like 0.5% have earned a single dollar, which is pretty shocking, because I think that most platforms were in the range of maybe 20 or 40% of people have ever earned money, but under 1% is, yeah, pretty bad. If you think that you would like to join a platform and start earning, it doesn't really give you much reason for optimism. And similarly, I spoke about network effects earlier, but we see very consistently across platforms that a small minority of the workers get the most contracts and make the most money. So we also see that there's problems with suspension. And one of the things that we look at is we look at the forums where freelancers, platform workers, whatever, these little communities where they can go to each other, ask a question, seek help, right? And so you take someone who was freelancing for Upwork, and they'll post on the forum, hey, my account is suspended. It says that I simply cannot work anymore. I have money tied up with the account that I cannot access. And all I got was a notification that I violated the terms of service of the platform. I don't even know what I did. They won't offer me an explanation. All they do is give me a link to the terms of service so I can try to work out what I think happened and what my violation was, right? This is not helpful. I can't speak to a person to try to understand what happened. So this is a surprisingly common story. And I think that it harkens back to this lack of transparency and to this lack of a clear and consistent application of the rules. And it also harkens back to, God knows, maybe just like the algorithm that determines if they're a bot or if they're following the rules, whatever. Maybe they, logged in on vacation from the Bahamas or something, and then they tripped the bot's code that says, oh, they're not the real person, so their account was suspended, right? I mean, there's very simple, basic things that can happen where if you have, a stupid robot, a stupid algorithm that determines these decisions, you can just get screwed as a platform worker. Certain platforms have a business model where they will charge you, the platform worker. Now, I mean, there's different ways that platforms can make money. A very common one is they'll simply take a cut of whatever transaction occurs between the client and the worker. Sometimes it's a lower percent, sometimes a higher percent. But in many cases, a platform worker will join a platform and they'll see that they're not getting any contracts. They're trying to communicate with clients, but no clients are contacting them. And so after a certain point, the platform will start sending them push notifications or emails and say, hey, we noticed that you're not getting any work. What we can do is you can join our premium tier service, and we're going to give you a little, badge of honor next to your name. And then whenever someone searches for a computer programmer or whatever, you're going to be moved up the list of rankings. And so then all of a sudden you're paying a monthly fee or whatever to the platform in the hopes that somehow you're influencing their algorithms to start to get more work, right? And again, it's very unclear in many cases what platform workers are actually getting for their money. And it seems to me that this is one of the more problematic business models. And it's one that, in speaking to freelancers, they seem to be quite unhappy about when they face. And lastly, I have a little picture here. You can see that there's a very frustrated gentleman with a 4.5 star, 4.3, I guess, star rating. The dynamics of ratings and reviews are really fascinating to me. I'm hoping to eventually do a PhD or something about this, but I think that it's extremely interesting, but it can also be really unfair and damaging. And it's especially problematic for people who are new on the platform. So you can imagine that you've completed one task, and then I'm going to give you a real life example. I spoke to a gentleman who had just started on a platform, and they got their first assignment, and then an older gentleman client who had paid them wrote them this really nice review, said, this person did a great job. I was super happy with it, and I would totally hire them again, and left them 1 star. And then, so this older client presumed that a star is fantastic. I'll just give them a star, right? But of course, a 1 star is actually the worst possible thing that could happen to you, and you're screwed now, because what you have is an average 1 star rating, at which point, you can imagine yourself going on Amazon and shopping for a product. You're not going to buy a 1 star product, and no client is going to pay for a 1 star worker, right? And so even though this client clearly misunderstood what was happening, it still caused real tangible damage to this individual, right? So I think that the way that ratings and reviews work is a very tricky question, but certainly there's room for improvement for many platforms. I'm happy to speak more about this, or to hear if you have any stories about how you experience this. So long story short, platform owners need to think about business and ethics. I think that it's very clear that bringing in new workers and to retain your workers should be a very large priority. It can't just be this cash grab and this isolated focus on the client. I think that if there's one word to take away from this, maybe just transparency. I think that transparency in the way that you do your business needs to be the main focus for platform owners. And the final thought is that even if you have a fantastic idea, a really nice innovative business model, it's often still a very uphill struggle to compete with the big established platforms because of the network effects, which I previously discussed. So I won't take any more of your time. I can put this back up later, but you can always feel free to contact me via email. I think we're going to share these later anyway. So I'll stop my sharing, and yeah, happy to take any questions at any point. I'll hand it over to Andy now.
Hey, Zach, that was awesome. I think that there's a lot in there that could be potentially quite frightening to people. So I'm going to try and talk a little bit about how a platform owner decided to set up, and exactly my backstory in terms of what we're doing. In simple terms, my background is 20 years working for different staffing-based businesses. The first one, we took graduates or people in middle of their career and retrained them and then deployed them on site. They were permanently employed, but we did work with freelancers and contractors to set up teams and to bring in mentors and people to lead those teams to help the juniors out. My second job was working with a consultancy firm where we did risk and regulatory work. We had a team of about 100 people. The core team was 10 that were permanent, the rest all contract, all just brought in for the project. What was interesting over both of those roles over that sort of 16, 17-year period is that I mainly worked for banks, and every so often somebody who we're working for in the bank would say, come and help us out. We've got a freelancer. Would you rebadge them and deliver them back to us? And then you have a discussion over margin and value and all of these concepts. They think they're doing you a favor, you think you're doing them a favor. And there's this freelancer in the middle who is saying, hang on a minute, I just want to do good work and get paid my normal fee for delivery. So you get a bit of a bun fight. So I came to the platform's conclusion on a very simple basis, which was, given that we're all as consumers happy to go and buy a house through things like Purple Bricks, which is an online estate agency in the UK, or we're happy to book our holiday through lastminute.com or Expedia and so on. The need for an agent, the concept of having a person doing the brokering on your behalf for the client or the supplier is significantly diminished. And we should be able to replace some of that with technology. So we set up SixProg, which is now about 4 years old come November. But we had a conversation very, very early in the beginning, and somebody who at the time I respected quite a lot, and I think that's diminished over time as well. They said to me, who are you working for? Who is the platform for? And that question is probably there because of a lot of what Zach's just talked about. And their opinion was that the platform can only really work for the client or for the supplier. It has to be weighted in one direction. And probably it has to work for the client because they're the one paying. Now, fundamentally, I disagreed with that. I felt that actually what a platform should be is a trading place. It should be like a village hall that you go to for a jumble sale. Everyone's equal. Some people are there to buy, somebody's there to sell. And the burden of going and using that village hall should be shared by everybody, which typically, if it's a jumble sale, it would be. People coming in would pay 50 pence or euros, half a euro to go in. And the people running the stalls would pay a larger fee to have the stall. But overall, the burden of hosting that marketplace is shared by all the participants roughly equally. So that was the first thing that we did with SixProg. We set up the fee structure so that everybody paid exactly the same amount. The second thing that we looked at is all of the interesting terms that are hidden. And Zach talked a little bit about that as well. So I know some of the businesses and the ethics of some of those big platforms. Some of that, unfortunately, is driven by shareholders. So for those businesses to grow incredibly fast, they take on funding. The shareholders aren't, we're all shareholders in different businesses at different times, whether it's through our pensions or so on. But the shareholders who get involved with those early stage businesses are really only focused on one thing, and that's 10xing that business as soon as possible and then exiting. So if you look at the very, very big freelance platforms, that's what they've done. And in doing that, they have hugely put up barriers to absolve them of pretty much any risk of delivery. So instead of beginning from a point of view, which is how can we deliver a service that's useful to both the demand and the supply side of a given market, they're in a position of saying, how can we extract the maximum value from the platform that we've built? And then you get into these weird and wonderful things where I know one company recently started charging the supply side just to bid on projects. You have reverse auctions, which frankly, they don't help the client or the supplier because you end up with someone who can't do the work being paid hardly anything for not completing it. And you get into this daft situation, as Zach described, where you might even go to your suppliers and say, give me some money and I'll promote you in our platform. Which again, I'm not here to sell my own platform, but that's something we don't do. We actively give people tools to promote themselves, which are completely free. So that's a little bit about where I came from and why I felt that we needed another platform in the mix that did things a bit differently. What I'd really like to do is to hear from some of the people who've joined and maybe hear some of their stories. I've got plenty of anecdotal stories of bad things I've heard, but equally I've got some lovely anecdotal stories of good things. So I think I'll end my presentation with one of those. And it's a business that was working for a while with an agency. They were bringing in developers to manage their website and generally paying British pounds, about £600 to £650 a day for those people. they tripped over our website, started looking into it and ran a pilot with it, and they've managed to start moving those developers onto the platform. They had to pay off the agency, which again is another thing that I don't think platforms should do. It should be, you know, service as you need. You go in, use the service, and then you walk away. There shouldn't be any sort of ownership of the work you've delivered, or long-term, you can't buy me through another platform type policies. I don't think they're right. But with this particular business, they managed to move their freelancers off and started working with them directly. As it turns out, the actual day rates of those freelancers were around the £500 a day mark. So both the freelancers increased their day rates, only very marginally, but the client managed to reduce their expenditure. So both sides won, if you like, and the party that missed out is that old school agency, which I think has, you know, a limited lifespan to it. So I think, you know, from the perspective of where platforms might be going, we've seen the first generation of them. We've seen Freelancer, Upwork, Guru, the others. And I think there's going to be another wave of platforms that come through that may have more of a grassroots, look after the individuals who need to use them, as opposed to the shareholders who need to extract money from them.